The average person is said to spend 15 minutes in the bathroom. Why not take advantage of that time and learn something new? Presenting the 15-minute podcast on weird facts, crazy details, and funny particulars that you'll be able to enjoy while you're taking a on your free time. Welcome to This Shit with Sam Butler. Welcome to another episode of the Shit Podcast. Thank you guys for joining us. I have a very special guest. You've seen him on Sam and Ram at the Movies. But we're not doing Sam and Ram at the Movies on this particular episode. He's just here as a guest for the Shit Podcast. So,
hey, Sam.
Thank you for being here, buddy.
Thank you for having me, man.
We're going to talk about something different this time around. It has nothing to do with movies. Although I think a lot of our education on this subject comes from movies. But we're going to talk about the Underground Railroad.
Cool.
Now, the Underground Railroad, when you talk to people about the Underground Railroad in the United States, they relate it to Civil War or pre-Civil War, right? And that was a network of, it wasn't a real railroad. It was a network of places that allowed slaves to escape to the north.
Okay.
But in this particular case, we're going to talk about the Underground Railroad to the south, right? That's something that there's not a lot in the history books talking about the Underground Railroad from the United States to Mexico. But it's a very interesting subject because there's not a lot of information on it on the U.S. side. Not a lot of people know that it even existed.
Okay.
But you go back to 1837 and Mexico abolishes slavery. So slavery wasn't abolished in the United States till after the Emancipation Proclamation and the 14th Amendment. And even after that, you still had a lot of oppression of people of other races, predominantly black people. And there was even segregation and Jim Crow laws up until the 60s that didn't allow black people rights.
Okay.
So after 1837, particularly, they start to find out that there's thousands of slaves that are escaping through a network, an underground network of places, getting them into Mexico. Now, the United States had the Fugitive Slave Act, which allowed slave owners to go and recuperate their slaves anywhere in the United States. So let's say that you do make it to New York.
They're going to get you there.
They can get a bounty hunter to go get you, find you, and bring you back to the South through the Fugitive Slave Act. Well, Mexico decides to say, nah, we're not going to honor the Fugitive Slave Act. So it became an option for a lot of slaves, especially in the South in Texas, to make their way to Mexico.
Okay.
Now that still created a problem for them, although Mexico at the time was a very tough country to live in. They would escape slavery, which was even tougher, and they'd move to Mexico. But that didn't stop bounty hunters from trying to go get them. And so the bounty hunters would go, and there was a professor, and historian, Alice Baumgartner, who's the assistant professor at USC, who started looking into the subject because she couldn't find a lot of information on this Underground Railroad.
Okay.
And so when she started looking into the information on the documentation for the U.S. side, they find out that a lot of the documentation said that slaves had indeed escaped to Mexico, but life was so bad in Mexico that a lot of them came back on their own.
Oh, damn it.
That's what the documents in the U.S. says.
That's sad. Huh?
Right? But then she started looking at documentation from the Mexican side and realized that it wasn't that their life was so bad in Mexico that they'd rather be slaves. It was that bounty hunters were going back to Mexico, kidnapping them, and bringing them back to the slave owners.
Motherfuckers.
Yes, right? So what's happening there is that she went through hundreds of documents and found interviews from the town that interviewed families that were migrating into Mexico, entire slave families that were migrating into Mexico.
Yeah.
And yeah, life was hard for them because there was still racism in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, a lot of the Mexican citizens were willing to accept them
They were free,
and work with them.
of course.
And so we had a huge migration of African Americans
Okay.
in Mexico in the 1800s,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
So what the slave bounty hunters would do is they would go to Mexico and say that they were there looking for lost cattle, like my cow got lost. But the Mexican authorities kind of caught on to that and figured out that they weren't there looking for cattle; they were there looking for escaped slaves.
Mhm.
So Mexico was active in stopping a lot of that kind of kidnapping.
At least, yeah.
Right. So it says that this is a very important thing to understand because it took her 8 years to write her first book about this. All the research, all the documents, all the things that she did. And like you mentioned, it wasn't just Mexican slaves. It was Chinese railroad workers. There was a lot of different people that were looking for freedom. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that when we think of immigration, we think Mexico's trying to immigrate to the U.S., South America is trying to immigrate into the U.S., South America is trying to immigrate into Mexico, and then they're trying to immigrate into the U.S. But yet, Mexico was very open to this migration and was very helpful in keeping these guys. It says that some of the documents dated back to 1819.
Wow.
It was a gold mine of records, and it was because she went to Mexico and looked up the information, and she discovered letters between officials and Mexican towns who reported that they saw Americans claiming to be searching for lost cattle. They were looking for fugitive slaves. And since the nation's laws granted enslaved peoples access to freedom as soon as they set foot on Mexican soil, Mexican officials also refused to return runaways under the U.S. Fugitive Slave Act. Right. It exemplifies a trend among historians studying the U.S. Civil War. They are now looking for sources outside of the U.S. So her research into this has helped her look at other sources from other countries, other records, to narrate history.
Okay.
So this is really, really important.
Of course.
Because history is usually told by one side.
Uh-huh.
So now the trend amongst historians, thanks to her research, is to actually go to other countries and research the subject from the other country's perspective.
Cool. Yeah. There's a house here in El Paso downtown. It's called the Turtle House.
Okay.
It's it's on the west side. It's near UTEP. It's in the Sunset Heights district.
Okay.
And it's a very distinctive house because it has a turtle on the outside.
A turtle?
Yes. But the house has tunnels
Mm-hmm.
that history, people that have studied that, they say that those tunnels come here to Juarez, to Mexico. So maybe that's one of the...
It's possible that the migration was going south at that time. Sunset Heights is like the oldest neighborhood in El Paso.
Here in El Paso, we also had a lot of slave owners. I mean, there are pictures where they have a cantina, saloon, then slave for sale auctions. Come tomorrow, $1. I mean, so in El Paso, we had also the slavery, so they will come here to Juarez too.
From what I understand, like even during did you ever watch that movie Glory Road?
Yep.
You know, the Don Haskins story. I mean, El Paso, for being a town in Texas and being on the southern border, it really isn't a very white town. It's mostly Latino.
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a friend that said that El Paso's 80% Latino.
Okay.
And 20% border patrol.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things that, and my friend Iggy would say that on stage, and then I think Felipe Esparza recorded on one of his specials. But that's one of the deals, is that it's actually true. I mean, most of our population is Latino.
A lot. Go to the university, go to UTEP, and most of the students are from here, from Mexico, from Juarez. But
I do believe that in the 1800s, a lot of our population was white. and
He from Texas?
from Texas, from El Paso even.
I would say Spaniards that became Texans.
Germans. I mean, there was a rush, mining. It was a big industry out here, a lot of copper mining and so on and so forth. So we know that El Paso started, its life in the late 1800s, but we're talking before even El Paso was in existence, as a city, back when it was Franklin town.
Franklin, yep.
Yeah.
It was like a ranch or something, yeah?
Yeah, well, Franklin Kuntz was an early settler of El Paso, and the Franklin Mountains are actually named after Franklin Kuntz.
Okay, yeah.
And for a long time, it was called Franklin Town.
Okay.
Now, during the Civil War, and Mexico's president was Benito Juarez, and he had a really close relationship with Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
So they corresponded, and they were buddies. They had a good working relationship. And they say that I think they were both Masons. I don't know. I know that Benito Juarez was a Mason.
Yeah, grade 33rd.
Like a 33rd degree Mason.
Yeah, he had some good things, but he also had a lot of bad things. Yeah. We're going to talk about that later.
We'll talk about that later.
Yep.
Yeah. We got to do an episode about Benito Juarez.
He's still another politician, I mean.
He's
Come on.
And I think he was also indigenous, right?
He was. Not a lot, but he took advantage of that.
Took advantage of
for
that.
marketing purposes.
Okay.
Look, I'm an indigenous person. Vote for me.
Yeah, vote for me.
Well, vote for me because he did not get to the presidency by the vote.
Oh,
we'll talk about that
we'll
later.
Talk about that one later. What's changed?
What's changed? I mean, I know, and it's the same shit.
But so also Ciudad Juarez, which is where we're at now, which is the neighboring city with El Paso. Juaritos. Juarez, like my friends say.
I know, yeah.
All the white guys say Juarez.
Yeah, Juarez.
But it's Juarez. Ciudad Juarez. Actually was the capital of Mexico a couple of times.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it was twice.
Twice.
It was the interim capital of Mexico.
During the French occupation,
Yep. And so we know that historically this is a place where there was a lot of settlements. We were still part of the South. We were still part of Texas. Although right now we're kind of the exception. I think the rest of Texas is different from us. I think we're more like New Mexicans than Texans, honestly.
What, El Paso?
El Paso, yeah.
Yeah, there's more they're more open to things.
Yeah. I mean, we are so far out.
Yeah.
From the rest of the state.
Yeah.
That we're totally different.
You have your own identity.
Yeah, we're all completely different. Even our accent's different. I mean, I was in Dallas and they go, "Oh, you're from El Paso?" I said, "Yeah." They go, "Oh, that's hilarious." And I said, "What?" They go, "Yeah, El Pasoans always say that's hilarious. I don't know why." And I was like, "That's hilarious." But I started to realize that it's true. I mean, we do say it's hilarious a lot. So there, I mean, even other Texans recognize that we're different than most of the state of Texas. But I know that in downtown El Paso, there's some establishments that actually have black ceramic tile on the storefronts. Now, what I heard, I don't know if this is true, I haven't investigated it, but they said that the storefronts that had the black ceramic tile meant that they were businesses that would sell to black people.
Wow.
Right? And there's some like you go to the pizza joint downtown.
Yep.
And the storefront's all black ceramic, and some of the bars there all have that black ceramic right on Franklin Street, right? Another Franklin and Stanton, right? And so El Paso is a place where although we were like Texas, we were a little bit different. And when you watch that movie Glory Road, you see that this was the first. UTEP was the first, which was back then was the
first all-black team to win.
Yeah, well, it was the first team to put five black starters.
Okay. 5 black stars, okay.
On the team, right? Because they weren't all black, and they went against the University of Kentucky for the national championship and won. All right.
Go UTEP.
Well, Texas, it was Texas Western.
Texas Western at that time.
Yeah, Texas Western at that time, which is now UTEP. But you see how I can see how we would be more open to smuggling people across the border the other way in the 1800s. But I think those tunnels were made for people to come this way.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot that's kind of the catch-22 with the river is that the river is actually it's been turned into a channel. Right. Now, people look at the Rio Grande and go, it's not that big. Yeah, but Elephant Butte and Caballo Lake are dams that are holding back the water, the natural water for the Rio Grande. They're held back in New Mexico. But if not, this whole valley would get flooded every year.
Well, it was Rio Grande, Rio Bravo. That's how Mexicans call it. And back in the day, it was very wild.
Yeah. And now it's under control. As a matter of fact, the original Fort Bliss was right on the riverfront, and that had to be moved several times until they put it where it's at now to avoid the flooding.
Okay.
But this is another episode I want to talk about in the future.
Wonderful.
And the episode is about El Chamizal, right? which is a piece of land. Yeah, it's a piece of land that when the river would change course, the border would move, and the U.S. claimed that land.
Yeah.
And Mexico was like, that's our land. And they're like, no, the river is the border. And they said, yeah, but the river moved. They go, well, that's not our problem. So it was until 1963 that Lyndon B. Johnson actually has the Rio channelized and concreted in, and then gives some of the land back to Mexico. Okay. And we keep a part of the land. They have it surveyed where the river should go, and that's where the river is now. Okay. It's not a very big river in this part of the country. But all of our rainwater drains into the Rio Grande. So that means we have concrete inlets into that channel. And at that concrete inlet, you actually have wrought iron gates. And those gates get cut, and people climb in through those channels and come back into the U.S. Right? I know because in my welding business, the water department actually hired me to weld stainless steel grates on the tunnels so that you can't cut it real easy. Stainless steel is really hard to cut unless you have the right tools. In this case, you need like a plasma arc cutter, but even saw blades have a tough time. Grinders have a tough time cutting through stainless steel. And so I had to make stainless steel grates because they kept cutting the grates and people kept coming into those tunnels. So I think there was even a reporter here in El Paso that won an Emmy. It's not Luis Sardo, but there's another reporter that did the report on the tunnels out of people's houses, and I think he won an Emmy too on that. I think it was Robert Holguin. I think.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
But it's one of those things that we know that there's a rich history. But I think that for this episode of The Shit, I think it's pretty interesting that Mexico abolished its slavery in 1837
and welcomed
all the slaves, and then also protected them from being kidnapped and dragged back to Mexico.
Yeah, go Mexico.
And that's it for this episode of The Shit Podcast.
Okay,
but
cool.
Thank you guys for joining us once more. Thank you, Ram, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I think it's a very interesting topic. I hope that this gives you something to talk about at your next doctor's appointment. But with that being said, that ends us for today. How can people find you on social media?
On Instagram as Dubis Buis.
Yep. And you can find me as Tu Amigo Sam on social media, as well as my YouTube channel and Está Cagado Podcast on all of the podcast platforms. We are at 15,000 subscribers now. Thank you guys. It's been fun. Please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell, leave your comments, say hello. I read them. So thank you guys, and that wraps us up. Thank you, Ram.
Thank you, man.
Catch you on the next one.
See you.